Welcome. I'm Robin Prater, the Executive Director of the Lutyens Trust America. As November is the month chosen for Remembrance Day in the UK and in the United States for Veterans Day, the Lutyens Trust America and the Lutyens Trust have felt this was the appropriate month for us to look at Lutyens memorials. Today, we will focus on the Irish National War Memorial Gardens. The last of Lutyens' war memorials to be built, it benefits greatly from the development of his ideas during his work with the War Graves Commission and has a unique history. The Irish National War Memorial commemorates the 49,400 Irish men who lost their lives during the First World War. Our panelists today are David Averill, Angela Rolfe, and Tim Skelton. David Averill is a partner in the architectural firm of Sheehan Barry. You may remember David from our webinar on Lambay. David gained his architectural degrees from Bolton College of Technology and Trinity College Dublin. He has a particular interest in the conservation of buildings that he pairs with his interest in how buildings can be sensitively added to or updated. David has worked on a number of significant conservation projects such as Giltown Stud in County Kildare, 8 Stevens Green in Dublin, Marion Square in Dublin, Russborough House in County Wicklow, in addition to numerous other large and small projects. Angela Rolfe has recently co-authored a book on the Irish National War Memorial Gardens entitled Shadows and Reflections, a series of essays and stunningly beautiful photographs. Originally from England, Angela completed her architectural education in UCD 2 years after moving to Ireland in 1975. She earned her master's degree in urban design in 2006. Angela served as an architect in the Office of Public Works between 1980 and 2017, where she was responsible for the restoration, adaptation, upgrading, and maintenance of a broad range of high-profile state buildings, including Dublin Castle. She is currently chair of the RIAI Universal Design Task Force, regional director of the UIA Architecture for All Work program, and part-time lecturer at Yeats Academy of Art, Design, and Architecture, Atlantic Technological University, Sligo. Angela has lived close to the Irish National War Memorial Garden since 1977. Tim Skelton is a retired property surveyor and became fascinated by Lutyens following a visit to Castle Drogo in the 1980s. He developed a particular interest in his war memorials, which was part of the architect's work that was largely unresearched at that time. It led him to collaborating with Gerald Glidden in writing Lutyens and the Great War, which was published in 2008, a wonderful reference. Let me remind you this webinar is being recorded and will be placed at a later date on our website and YouTube channel. If you have questions, please add them to the Q&A button on our screen, and Marcos Lutyens will hold them till the end of the webinar and will answer them as time allows. Thank you for watching. If you're not already a member of the Lutyens Trust America or the Lutyens Trust, please consider this an invitation to join us. Now I'll turn the webinar over to Angela.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are. The Irish National War Memorial Gardens are located in Islandbridge on the west side of Dublin City, as identified on these Google images. It is a permanent memorial to all Irishmen who died in the Great War for the whole island of Ireland, north and south of the border. The aerial photograph on the right is a view from the south, with the memorial gardens in the foreground, the River Liffey crossing the center of the image, the magazine fort in the Phoenix Park overlooking the memorial gardens. Arasanuthron, the president's house, is in the distance. It's the white building at the top of the slide. And over on the left, on the west side, the American ambassador's house is hidden by trees. As Robin has said, nearly 50,000 Irishmen were killed during the First World War. In July 1919, 2 weeks after the Treaty of Versailles was signed, over 100 people attended a meeting chaired by Sir John French, the Lord Lieutenant of Ireland, at the Viceregal Lodge in the Phoenix Park, which is now the same Áras an Uachtaráin, home of the President of Ireland. A memorial committee was appointed to raise the funds to create a memorial to commemorate the Irish war dead. The standing committee was chaired by Sir Dunbar Plunkett Barton, an Anglo-Irish British politician, with Andrew Jemison, senator and chair of Jemison Whisky Distillery, as treasurer. £50,000 was raised by public donations within a short time. As an interim measure, a set of books was commissioned listing the names of every Irish soldier who had been lost in the war. Ireland's memorial records contain just under 50,000 names in 3,200 pages in 8 volumes. The books were compiled, designed and produced during one of Ireland's most turbulent periods, the War of Independence from 1919 to 1921, the formation of the Irish Free State, followed by the Civil War, 1922 to 23. The very best of Irish artisans were involved in the production, including Harry Clarke, a book illustrator and stained glass artist, who was commissioned to decorate the book. He created 7 designs, silhouettes of military scenes, which are mixed with drawings in black and ink from Celtic mythology to form a setting for each page. The title page on the left here contains images and symbols of Ireland. To the left and right are the crests of the provinces of Ireland. The top border has a simple memorial cross, and the bottom border shows the female personification of Ireland with an Irish wolfhound by her side, and flanking her are a Celtic cross and a ruined abbey with a round tower. And here are examples of the top border and 2 lower borders. 100 copies of the memorial records were printed in 1923 at a cost of £5,000. Apart from the set of memorial records held in the book rooms at the Irish National War Memorial Gardens in Dublin, there are 24 sets of memorial records known to be in public buildings and churches throughout the whole island of Ireland, and a further 10 copies in several countries, including the British Library and Imperial War Museum in London, in Flanders Fields Museum in Belgium, the Vatican City Library, the Library of Congress, Washington, USA, and the Australian War Memorial Research Centre in Canberra, Australia. However, a location for a permanent memorial to house these books was more difficult. Several proposals, including a monument in Merrion Square and a new commemorative entrance archway to the Phoenix Park, were considered and then rejected by the Irish Free State government. In 1924, it was reported that 20,000 veterans and a crowd of 50,000 gathered at College Green outside the main gate to Trinity College for the 11th of November Remembrance Day ceremony. From 1926, the government granted permission to the British Legion, the Irish Free State area, to erect a temporary cross beside the Wellington Monument in the Phoenix Park. Records show that ex-servicemen attended an 11 a.m. Mass in the Pro Cathedral and then marched to the Phoenix Park along the Liffey Quays for speeches and 2-minute silence. Each year, the British Legion invited the President of the Executive Council, the head of the Free State government, to lay a wreath, and each year the invitation was declined. By 1929, it was reported that numbers attending the Remembrance Day ceremonies had dropped to about 10,000 ex-servicemen and a crowd of about 9,000. During the 1930s, the ceremonies attracted skirmishes with anti-treaty forces, also known as the Irregulars, causing disturbances, and following pressure, excuse me, someone should have turned it off. Following pressure from An Garda Síochána, the Irish police, the government imposed restrictions on the sale of Flanders poppies, the display of the Union flag, and military-like marching. There was a growing awareness of a need for a suitable location for people to gather to mark the Remembrance Day. In 1929, Andrew Jemison, treasurer of the Memorial Committee, asked T.J. Cosgrave, head of the Free State government, that a proportion of land in the Phoenix Park be allocated for a memorial. Cosgrave then asked the Office of Public Works for any suitable lands adjacent to the Phoenix Park. At a cabinet meeting on the 29th of September 1929, Thomas J. Byrne, principal architect of the Office of Public Works, presented a suitable site to accommodate the annual Remembrance Day ceremonies. The Longmeadow site, outlined on this map in a heavy black line, extends from Islandbridge in the east to almost Chapel Lizard on the west, on both sides of the River Liffey, and crossing the Great Southern and Western Railway with a main entrance on Inchicore Road. The memorial plot is marked with a faint red cross on this map. The government approved this proposed site and promised extra funds for a public park. I found no record of the appointment of Edwin Lutyens or a brief for the War Memorial. However, Sir Dunbar Plunkett Barton and Andrew Jemison may have met Lutyens through his Irish clients and projects, Hayward Gardens, County Laois, Lambay Island, and Howth Castle, both in County Dublin, and his proposals for a Dublin art gallery for the Hugh Lane collection. Andrew Jemison was a collector of Irish art and a supporter of the Hugh Lane's Dublin Art Gallery. In addition, Lutyens, as we know, was particularly experienced in the design of war memorials and cemeteries, and was at the peak of his career in 1929. His work at New Delhi was nearing completion, for which he received knighthood, and he was appointed architect for Liverpool Cathedral. In 1930, Lutyens came to Ireland to inspect the Long Meadows for the first time and met T.J. Cosgrave, who was suitably impressed by his reputation. Lutyens prepared a design which was forwarded to T.J. Byrne, who compiled a lengthy report and an estimate of cost, which he presented to government the following year. Byrne's role was to be critical in the successful collaboration for this very sensitive project. These images are photographic copies of the three initial drawings for the War Memorial Gardens. Sadly, the original drawings seem to have been lost. T.J. Byrne recommended Lutyens' design to government in November, and a scale model was commissioned. Lutyens' design for the War Memorial was approved by the Free State government in July 1931. Sir Dunbar Plunkett Barton was later to recall, as the designer of our memorial, we selected Sir Edwin Lutyens, whom we are not alone in deeming the first architect of the age. His masterpieces are among the chief ornaments of Great Britain and of India, as well as of Ireland. This drawing shows the extent of the first preliminary phase for a public park, which began in late 1931, employing an equal number of ex-soldiers from both the British Army and the Irish National Army. Controversially, government funds for the scheme were being drawn from the budget allocated to unemployment relief works designed to tide over agricultural workers during the winter and to slow down emigration. To ensure the maximum amount of labor available, the men worked mostly with manual tools, with only a steamroller and 2 concrete mixers. Landscaping works included the filling of old gravel pits, converting cart tracks into metalled roads, reducing steep slopes and hollows, and making new entrances at the far east and west of the linear park. In late 1933, the levelling and regrading of the north-facing Liffey Valley started in preparation for the construction of the War Memorial. The Articles of Agreement between the Memorial Committee and the Minister of Finance of the Free State was signed in 1933. The linear park was to be funded by government and the War Memorial by the Irish National War Memorial Trust, each offering up £50,000. Sir Edwin Lutyens designed the main ceremonial entrance on Inchicore Road, which you see at the bottom of the photograph and the drawing, with a new road between a colonnaded bridge over the railway lines leading onto the horseshoe road bordering the ceremonial lawn and symmetrical rose gardens. He created a strong central axis via a series of step terraces leading to the memorial cross, the great wallstone in the center of the ceremonial lawn, the temple leading to a second bridge over the River Liffey and onto Cunningham Road and into the Phoenix Park. The next slide. This is the first of a selection of Lutyens' drawings in the Office of Public Works Library. The original drawings show his finely honed detail designs for the memorial and are a testament to his care and attention to detail. Many elements of the design have been recycled at the Memorial Gardens from his earlier country house and gardens, cemeteries and memorials.
I think it's worth at this stage to put Dublin in context with other memorials that Lutyens did around the world. These are 5 of his national memorials, 3 cenotaphs, as you can see, with the first one at London on the left-hand side of the screen, and then the others in Bermuda and Hong Kong. And then Sri Lanka, something completely different that doesn't appear anywhere else. A tall column which used to have a brazier on the top emitting flames, which is rather romantic, something that happened on a number of, in theory, on a number of Lutyens memorials, but we've never seen any photos of it happening. And then the largest memorial of all, the wonderful arch in New Delhi, commemorating the Indians who lost their lives in the war. And then this pulls together the sort of various elements that Angela was talking about of war memorials that Lutyens did, both memorials and his cemeteries. You've got the war stone at the front, an obelisk in the fountain, and then the book rooms behind and the pergola between them. I don't know if you wanted to say anything, David.
Well, Tim, I think anybody who goes to the Memorial Gardens for the first time, it's an enormous revelation, the scale, the complexity, the ambition of the design. And in a sense, even for Dubliners, for some Dubliners, it's something of a hidden place because, as Angela has alluded to, the site was such a dramatically sloped site and has now become hidden behind kind of a dual carriageway on one side. So it's still something of a secret for many Dubliners, and who I was actually talking to somebody at lunchtime who'd never been there. So I always encourage Dubliners to discover it because it is a wonderful place. We talked about how the fountains maybe echo the design he did for Trafalgar Square, and you have an example of a similar fountain on a smaller scale that he used in another location in London, which is an interesting comparison. And I think that War Memorial Gardens exhibits the same kind of skillful use of local materials that he was so good at, of understanding the genius of the place and the genius of local materials, so that everything he designed was rooted in its location so carefully. And that's one of the reasons why it works so well and feels so natural within its designed location.
David, one of the comments you made during our rehearsals was that this was such a theatrical space and that it was designed to accommodate large numbers of gatherings, which is something perhaps you would.
I think that when, as Angela mentioned, that although the numbers had declined, you were still looking at potentially 10 to 20,000 people wanting to celebrate and remember on the occasion of the armistice celebration. And so this suitably ambitious space can accommodate those kind of numbers. And then the design is so clever because it links with the landscape in a way that the site allowed. It's unique, reasonably unique, I think, Tim, in that it's purely a place of remembrance and isn't a cemetery, unlike so many of the other memorials.
And you talk about what these two structures here are. We'll talk about them on the next slide.
Yes. Well,
Those are
these
the
the
book
book
rooms.
rooms. Those the book rooms, as you note, Robin, which we you might call them a tetrapylon, in a sense that they're a structure which faces in 4 different directions and recognizes 4 different axes. The subtlety and complexity of what he does here is evident from the drawings, and also, you know, on visiting the site. They act in a sense as anchors for the design, these 4 pavilions which house the books, and they act as linkages then to the pergola, which pulls the design together, and at the same time allows kind of permutation between the more contemplative rose gardens to either side and the more ceremonial space in the center. So,
Jim, do you think they have any connection to the shelter buildings from the earlier memorials?
Yes, I think we'll be coming on to those later. Yes, they're very similar.
The drawing on the left is an enormous drawing in reality, and that detail is full size. And these would have been converted into zinc templates by the resident engineer for the masons to shape and carve by hand granite from the quarries in Wicklow and Dublin. As you can see, it has a hidden gutter, which I think the pavilions, which Tim will refer to in the next slide, also has hidden gutters, which leads to some problems, and not this slide. This shows the pergola on the right, the pergola linking. There are 4 book rooms, 2 pairs, that are linked by these granite and oak beam pergolas, covered with wisteria and clematis. And then the view on the left shows the pair of book rooms. That's not the flooded arena. It's actually looking across the fountain, the bowl at the base of the fountain. I think it's the next slide, which shows the, yes.
Yes, this shows the similarity between what's happening in Dublin and cemeteries that Lutyens designed on the Western Front, particularly 2 images we picked up there. The one on the right, the top right, the entrance pavilions, the Australian cemetery at Villers-Bretonneux. Large buildings. Again, you can see, you look at the details of them, you can't see any gutters or drain pipes. All of Lutyens' work on the Western Front, and you can see on the buildings at the bottom, is eschewed having external drain pipes. I think at probably some cost to the maintenance, particularly the building on the right, where leaves tend to get stuck inside the structure, but so be it. So the one on the bottom left, I put in it a slightly more modern in feel than the others, which are more classical, but I thought it illustrates this plain profiled roof of stone slates very well. This is a lovely little cemetery in Belgium. But again, you've got the 2 pavilions framing the war stone, very much in the way that the Irish, the book rooms at the top frame the views through to the war stones from and the rose garden from the long axis of the gardens, and then the Sayre Cemetery, bottom right, just picking up again some classical details of the buildings within the cemetery. And then that from the bottom right, that leads back into Sayre, looking back from the view of the first photograph up the length of the cemetery, and you see the 2 buildings there framing the cross, and drawing the analogy then with Ireland, where you've got the 2 book rooms framing the obelisk in the middle of the fountain. And as we'll see in a minute, the War Memorial also contains a a cross, and this was same design as crosses that Lutyens designed in a number of towns and cities throughout Britain where he was commissioned. Very simple cross with a simple cross section, and being Lutyens, it's while the cross is largely the same, he plays with the base and the way it stands on the ground. So in the middle, village of Missedon in Gloucestershire, just simple square blocks, whereas slightly more elaborate on the left at York. This is the city memorial, one of two he did in the city. And you've got a traditional undercut base, which is a Lutyens used a lot in both his graves and war memorials. And then on the right, village of Wargrave in Berkshire, where there's slightly differently, instead of a square cross section, he's got a hexagonal cross section to the base, which reflects the cross section of the cross and pulls it all the way through to the steps at the bottom. The Lutyens, as you probably will be aware, was one of the three main principal architects for the Wargraves Commission, and they were given the flexibility within the Wargraves of using their own crosses if they wanted to, but Lutyens decided, as did Baker, decided that they would all use the cross designed by Reginald Blomfield, with which you'll be familiar, I'm sure, and which is a common theme through all the Wargraves.
And Tim, I think there's an incredible sculptural quality to the Lutyens design for this cross. It almost feels like as though he's carved into a single kind of monolithic piece of granite, so that it feels quite modern and understated, almost a sort of crossed with an obelisk. You know, the proportion is so vertical, and the cross quite understated, which kind of ties in with Lutyens' aspiration that these monuments be not, shall we say, overtly religious in their intention, that they were, you know, less traditional in their expression of a religious intention.
Yeah, that's a good point. Very good point.
So this shows the location of the cross in Dublin at the base of the terraces. So at the top, on the top left, is the Horseshoe Road as you would come in from the Memorial Road, and then the cascade of steps down to the arena or the lawn, and as David, you pointed out, it's not central, not located centrally on the circle, but it's pushed forward. It's far more dramatic.
It produces a kind of tension, really, doesn't it, Angela, in the positioning of it and its relationship to the semicircular steps then. But, you know, these act then almost as a kind of cushion or a pillow in translating the steps to the softer grassed area in the center.
So the image on the left is from near the top of the steps looking down, and you can just see behind the cross the Great War Stone, and then looking up from the lawn with that beautiful circular steps almost sort of melting out onto the grass. And then the detail of the granite steps and the limestone, probably Dublin kelp, limestone rubble wall. It's the height of the cross. I mean, it's a tall, solid cross with a strong base, but the height of the steps behind is almost as tall as the cross.
And as usual with Lutyens in his Irish work, there's this kind of juxtaposition of the use of materials in an almost rustic fashion, juxtaposed with quite refined and highly wrought architectural moldings and compositions. So it's always this interesting way that he balances the two expressions of natural materials or local materials.
So this is one of the pairs of fountains with the obelisk in the center of the bowl, with a beautiful paved pattern, which you only see when they drain the water out of the pool. But there again, very intricate cutting out of stone to make that base.
And here we have just further details of the fountain with the obelisk in the middle, and then showing it in relationship to the book room with the pergola. And so following that through to what Lutyens had done elsewhere. And this is the Royal Naval Division War Memorial in London, which was moved just before the Second World War out to Greenwich to keep it safe. And that's where the photograph on the left was taken back, can't think, probably just before 2000 or something like that, with water running through it. It was relocated with some ceremony back to Horse Guards Parade. We see the picture of it on the right, but unfortunately the water doesn't flow from it anymore, I believe, and it just sits in the corner of Horse Guards Parade. But there you can see two more or less identical fountains, or it's identical with the, very similar rather to the one at Islandbridge.
This shows at the top left the memorial cross at the top of the curved steps, and going directly northwards the great stone, war stone, and then over to the west on the fountain goes through the center of the fountain, and further on to the center of the pool in the sunken rose garden. And then you can see you've got paths coming in from the northwest and from northwest and southwest. So the symmetry, the formal symmetry, and then you can see the retaining wall, which contains the arena or the lawn, which is only opened. So you go through between the book rooms, under the pergola, from the sort of the parade, the military, the formal arena, through to the more quieter and more comforting rose garden, and which is surrounded by a yew hedge, which is a classic Gertrude Jekyll and Lutyens boundary treatment.
And this is a comparison really between War Memorial Gardens and the circular garden at Haywood in County Laois, where Lutyens uses both the changes of level to bring you down into the center of the garden, and these very coordinated sense of enclosure, again using rubble stone walls juxtaposed with the more architecturally refined elements, the book rooms at War Memorial Gardens and the garden pavilion at Haywood. So, and Lutyens always understood the nature of how geometry could bring order, and then this is always tempered by the planting. The OPW, I understand, have made a very conscious effort to replant and restore the gardens in the manner of Gertrude Jekyll. That's correct, isn't it, Angela?
Yes, that's right, yes.
And I think this has become a great favorite for people to visit. You can see Haywood at the bottom there. And in some senses, there's a little bit of an echo with the design for War Memorial Gardens, that you've got a large open area at Haywood, which I think was used for a tennis court. And then this leads through a more compressed area to the Oval Garden. That's this sort of pleached lime walk that leads to the Oval Garden at Haywood. And on a much grander scale, you can see the gardens at Rashtrapati Bhavan in New Delhi, formerly the Viceroy's Palace, where again, the idea of geometry and playing with levels is executed in such a effective way. And again, enclosed by a wall. So,
great, yes.
The War Stone, yes.
Yeah, you note that this drawing is dated 1918. In 1917, after Edwin Lutyens visited the Western Front, he recommended that each cemetery and memorial, whether in Europe, Asia, or Africa, should have one large non-denominational monument that should be known as the Great War Stone. He strongly believed that the structure, as David has already said, should for all time and for men of all creeds, and that they were to be all equally deserving of an enduring record. So he was very particular, as David, as you know, that it would be one stone precisely 12 foot long. The stone would vary from location to location. So in Ireland, it is granite, which is far more difficult to work with.
And as we talked about this, Tim, about how the design exhibits incredible subtlety, that the vertical surfaces are straight but tapered, and that the horizontal surfaces are very subtly curved. So there's an incredible subtlety. And then the quotation, which is from Leviticus, I think, is on each and every war stone. And this reoccurs across his canon of work for the war memorials. Except I think you mentioned that some of them were just too small to take this element, but it's very widely used.
Yes, some don't, but he did actually insist on it all being the same size, David, and which is why it doesn't appear in some of the smaller war cemeteries on the Western Front, particularly because it was felt it would overwhelm them. I think the interesting point here is when you look at the incredible detail of the measurements of the stone, and it was, I think, originally designed to be carved in Portland stone, and it would be interesting to measure the stone in Dublin against the drawing, because as Angela mentioned, the difficulty of carving granite to the sorts of precision that's being talked about on the drawing, to 2/5 of an inch. And the incredible sort of subtlety on to try and get the curve, to correct the curve for entasis, to correct optical distortion, and whether that was actually possible in something like this.
It was suggested that Lutyens intended that these Great War Stones, as well as acting as the focus for the cemetery or memorial, that it was also almost like an altar in the vast cathedral space. And in fact, in Dublin, at the time that Lutyens was designing the War Memorial Gardens, he was working on his last great commission, the Roman Catholic Church in Liverpool. So that he was working with that scale in Liverpool. And certainly if you visited the crypts, the size and the sort of robustness of the stone there is quite extraordinary. And what you see in this image is, although the trees have matured and come down, they look very dense, but they are terraced. So when those trees were much younger, you had a sloping amphitheater for an audience, for the people attending to watch the parades or the ceremony down on the lawns below.
And I think we mentioned in our discussions previously that Lutyens' understanding of the nature of the Irish granite informed the design and detail, so that he understood that this material couldn't take very, very fine moldings, so that there's a kind of softness to the moldings, which kind of in some senses works to complement the robust nature of the material, so that when you're there, you can sort of see how sort of soft the moldings are. And of course, 80 or 90 years of weathering will have helped to increase that effect. So, you know, again, Lutyens is understanding the nature of the local materials and working with them rather than against them. You can see the bench there, Angela, and the base of the adjacent, that the molding is quite, you know, simple to reflect the nature of the granite. But
it's a very generous gesture, providing 50 benches in this, but very simple and robust, in a beautiful setting. I mean, they're around on different levels in the, mostly in the rose gardens, but there are some in the alcoves of the book rooms as well, looking in both directions.
Yes, and even though there's a kind of subtle emphasis to the support for the bench, you know, there's a consideration. We're looking at the design which was never executed for the temple, which was to be the focal point of all the radial pathways that were tree-lined, and this was down by the river. And as we'll see in a later slide, a modern temple was relatively recently installed. But we were talking about how this design that Lutyens made is an interesting contradiction and quite a kind of intriguing design. In a sense, there's this kind of element in the center, which is like totemistic in its design and quality, and yet it's shrouded by this kind of almost arts and crafts roof and colonnade of columns. So it feels again as though Lutyens is inviting you to explore and to discover what lies within this cloak, this chevron decorated cloak, which I think you mentioned, Angela, was originally intended to be in lead. The roof.
Well, that's how it was described. Yes.
Yeah, so it has an almost tent-like quality, and then when you're not really aware of the scale of this element in the center until you sit in the seats underneath. So it's an intriguing design, and in a sense, it's quite different from the rest of the War Memorial Gardens. It seems to bring in elements from his arts and crafts background, which is very interesting.
It almost makes me think that it was might be something he had designed a number of years ago and was waiting for an opportunity to use it.
Yes, yes. And then this is a drawing of the proposed bridge across the Liffey, which was not executed. And we were talking how this is perhaps echoes earlier bridges that were built at Runnymede and at Hampton Court. And it's really quite understated and discreet, and the balustrade is quite low, and that it really was serving a purpose to connect the Phoenix Park with the Memorial Gardens, and not really to distract from those two major elements.
So following on the chronology of the development, Andrew Jemison formed a subcommittee to advise on the planting of the park and gardens, and members of the Botanic Gardens, staff of the Botanic Gardens and the Phoenix Park were part of this committee. They ordered and planted yew hedges around the rose gardens, and cherry trees, Cornish elm, poplar, birch, acers and maples. This was a list that was prepared by Lutyens, and they were set out in a military formation and avenues, and there was a hierarchy to the trees. You see the poplars forming the avenue on the right there. In between the avenues, there were a lot of cherry trees, but they're set out in strict military formation, lining up. In 1935, the next slide, Lutyens inspected the works and was pleased with what had been accomplished under the weekly supervision of T.J. Byrne, who had visited the site every Saturday for the whole 5 years of the construction period. There must have been extensive correspondence between Lutyens and Byrne between 1931 and 38, and I've no idea whether it exists, but it would be wonderful if somebody could find it. Work ceased in February 1938 when the funding for the memorial ran out before the project was complete. The main entrance at the junction of Inchicore Road and Memorial Road, the granite colonnaded bridge over the Great Southern and Western Railway, the temple and the masonry bridge over the Liffey all had to be omitted. Under pressure from the British Legion, a formal opening was planned for the 30th of July 1939. However, rumours of war caused Eamon de Valera, who now was the head of the Free State government, to abandon this planned event. Remembrance Day ceremonies with very limited access finally took place in the Irish National War Memorial Gardens in 1940 and continued very modestly until 1970. In the late 1940s, the OPW produced a modified design for the completion of Lutyens' original intention, including the main ceremonial entrance at the southern end of the main axis, a railway bridge, and 2 lodges for gardeners and constables. But in the end, only a very modest bridge over the railway line was constructed. The slow decline and isolation of the War Memorial started in the 1950s, when Dublin Corporation decided to build a road connecting the new suburb and Ballyfermot to the city centre, and the aerial image on the right shows that road under construction. You can see quite clearly the Memorial Road, the entrance road from from Inchicore Road on the south side, leading to the Horseshoe Road. During the IRA border campaign, a bomb was placed at the base of the Memorial Cross on Christmas Day in 1956, and again on Christmas Day in 1958. The damage was repaired by the OPW, costing £30 in 1956 for the first attempt and £5 for the second attempt. In addition, the OPW gave a 99-year lease to Dublin Corporation on a section of the linear park west of the War Memorial to develop as a public park, which we're still waiting for. In the 1970s and 80s, there was a lapse in activity in the Memorial Committee, which coincided with the reduction of OPW staff in the gardens due to budget cuts, down from 12 staff in 1969 to only 3 in 1987. The park deteriorated, walls were covered with graffiti, the staff quarters had been burnt out and abandoned, and the paths and lawns were used for racing cars and horses. A storm in 1986 added to the destruction of the planting, and the site was in a very sorry state. And the Memorial Gardens, the image on the right is March 2020. It still has the occasional graffiti, but it's usually removed immediately by the maintenance staff. A new memorial committee was reconvened in 1985, and it was agreed that they would fence around the memorial site, and the Office of Public Works would restore the structures and gardens within it. The works carried out included the repair and refurbishment of all the footpaths, the restoration of the book rooms, the granite and timber pergolas, fountains and lily ponds, and the provision of a new car park for the new entrance on the east side of the Memorial Gardens. At this time, the engraving of Their Name Liveth Forevermore was completed on the Great War Stone, and 1914 to 1980 on the Memorial Cross was finally completed. The gardens were formally opened in September 1988, 50 years after they'd been completed. There were many security concerns. The previous November had seen the Remembrance Day bombing in Enniskillen in Northern Ireland. And although anti-extradition protesters interrupted the formal opening, it was attended by a number of ambassadors, representatives of the main churches, and the Deputy Lord Mayor of Dublin, but no ministerial representatives, which was noted by the press at the time. Although the Memorial Gardens were restored by 1990, it was severely compromised by the construction of a dual carriageway, which sliced off the top of the Horseshoe Road and positioned the Memorial Road outside the park and cut off the gardens from the community, which you can clearly see at the bottom of the aerial photo. In 1992, the Memorial Committee approved plans for an alternative temple. Lutyens' original design was considered impractical for the time as it had a leaded roof, as per the minutes of the Memorial Committee meeting. It is a relatively cheap structure comprising reconstituted stone columns and a fiberglass dome, with an extract from a 1914 sonnet, Safety by Rupert Brooke, which is set in the floor tiles. It does, however, serve to mark the north end of the main axis and acts as a reminder about the proposed Lutyens Bridge. And at this time, 1939 to 1949, was carved on the memorial cross to commemorate Irishmen who died during the Second World War. The temple was completed in 1993 and formally unveiled by the then Minister of Finance, Bertie Ahern, in the following year. Teak Lutyens benches funded by the Irish Guards were installed in the gardens. They suffered from vandalism very quickly and were removed. Some were repaired and given to Leopardstown Park Hospital in South County Dublin. OPW fabricated and installed painted steel replicas in their place, which are still there. The War Memorial Gardens was designated as a protected structure by Dublin City Council in 2000. And the first ceremony to commemorate the Irish war dead that was attended by An Taoiseach, that's the Prime Minister, took place in 2006. In the past 2 decades, the Irish National War Memorial Gardens have become the focus of commemorations for the centenary of the Great War, specifically the Battle of the Somme and the armistice on the 11th of November, 1918. In 2011, it was the key location of the official visit itinerary of Queen Elizabeth II. The Queen and President Mary McAleese attended a service of remembrance and wreath laying at the War Memorial Gardens. On the same day, there was a reciprocal event at the Garden of Remembrance in Parnell Square, Dublin, which commemorates those who died for Irish independence. The Office of Public Works Heritage Services continue to manage and maintain the War Memorial Gardens to a high standard that befits a National Historic Park. They work in cooperation with the trustees of the National War Memorial Gardens Committee and facilitate the annual Remembrance Day event in cooperation with the British Legion. It has been a long-time ambition of the Memorial Committee, Dublin City Council and the Office of Public Works to complete Lutyens' plan and erect a bridge that would connect the Irish War Memorial Gardens to the Phoenix Park. A design competition was launched to mark the 150th anniversary of Lutyens' birth. Submissions were received from 61 architectural practices from 9 countries. The competition winning design for a new commemorative bridge that you see here is by Ian Ritchie Architects of London. This is Ian Ritchie's second major competition win in Ireland, having previously designed the Spire of Dublin to mark the millennium. The winning bridge design is a slender curve of stainless steel, which, unlike Lutyens' proposed masonry bridge, will have a minimum impact on the flora and fauna and be accessible for all. It is expected that a planning application will be lodged before the end of the year. I believe that the Irish National War Memorial Gardens represent a synthesis of the breadth and quality of buildings and cultural landscapes that Lutyens produced during his extraordinarily prolific architectural career. The Irish War Memorial Gardens, as probably his last completed public project, demonstrates his use of local materials, quality craftsmanship, and beautiful planting honed during the design and adaptation of many small country houses. The layout and built structures are inspired by logical classicism, which he'd employed in large country houses and public buildings, and expressed in the formality of symmetry of the layout of New Delhi, even recycling the obelisks from Delhi to Dublin as fountains. The overall sense of place is informed by his empathy and humanism, which he captured in the careful dignity of cemeteries and memorials, and which demonstrates his response to the chaos and suffering he had witnessed when he visited the Western Front in 1917. During the past few years, the memorial gardens have been rediscovered by the local community and the wider population of Ireland. And it continues to have an important role, bringing together people from north and south of the island of Ireland and east and west of the Irish Sea. I believe that with the Irish National War Memorial Trust as custodians, the Office of Public Works responsible for the management and maintenance, the Irish National War Memorial Garden is safe, and this extraordinary example of Lutyens' vision preserved for future generations.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And now we'll turn this over to Marcos Lutyens for questions.
Yeah, that was an amazing webinar. So we have a question from Richard Breeze. Have the paths always been tarmac? Who'd like to pick that up?
I will, just from regularly walking through there, I can see that underneath was concrete. You can see where there's been some slight slippage in the granite steps, and there's broken concrete underneath. So and in fact, the horseshoe path at the top, you can see some of the original concrete there.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? If you have a quick question, maybe you could pop it into the Q&A tab.
We were fortunate to be able to visit the Irish National War Memorial Gardens during the Lutyens Trust trip last autumn, and we're planning another trip to Ireland in June. But it's an amazing space, and it's, you know, we can show you photographs, but being there is if you get to Dublin, please find it. It's worth seeing.
So, well, I think we may round things up. I'd just like to say thank you to Tim Skelton and David Averill and Angela Rolfe, and also to, oh, we have one more question. Do you think that the geometry of the unbuilt temple has a theosophical quality? And that's from Timothy Rohan.
That's an interesting one. I'm not sure that I'm so well versed in theosophy to answer the question, but I see it as kind of an example of Lutyens' kind of contradiction and complexity melding together with the classical and the arts and crafts. But the symbolism is something that I haven't really been able to figure out yet myself.
I wondered whether it was, when I first saw it, it's one of Lutyens' little jokes, because it does seem somewhat out of place. And he was very good at doing, you know, his little sketches of jokes. That maybe it was left, as somebody suggested, it was left behind from somewhere else, and he thought he'd try it here. But it's very exotic. I mean, extraordinarily exotic, the detail of it.
I think somewhat, David, maybe you made the comparison with Homewood, where you've got a classical.
Yeah. We were talking about this, Robin, that sometimes Lutyens, the classical almost breaks out of the arts and crafts envelope. And at Homewood, one of the smaller houses he designed early in his career for his mother-in-law, Lady Lytton, there's a classical glazed loggia which breaks out of its kind of arts and crafts cloak and kind of manifests, and that he was very good at doing this, almost a sense of layering of style, one with another, which kind of is a unique kind of thing that he brings to his designs. And you can see it in other houses like Tyburn Court, where you have a classical loggia kind of placed within an arts and crafts design. So maybe this was a even more complex and kind of slightly intriguing version of that kind of layering that he employed so often.
Okay, very last question, because we're almost over. Are the drawings available anywhere to study?
Yes, the Office of Public Works Library is in Trim, County Meath, and you can contact the librarian and make an appointment to go and see them. They also have them, they've had them scanned as PDFs, so they are available. The ones that were shown here are probably the most interesting ones, but there are a lot of, as I said, full-scale drawings of details that don't mean much, you know, in a PowerPoint presentation. But there are some there. But sadly, the first sort of sketch scheme that he did, that I showed the photos of, which was the original, slightly more complicated proposal, they seem to be lost. So that it's more the drawings that we used for construction the UPW has, because the principal architect would have needed them to supervise. But the original design ones and all the correspondence, I don't know what happened to that.
Okay, well, I think we're pretty much out of time. I just also wanted to thank Robin Prater for the great introduction, and also that if you'd like to join as a member, either Lutyens Trust America or the Lutyens Trust, the links are in the chat, and we hope to see you on the next webinar in 2 months' time. Thank you very much to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.